The first time Aria Whitmore saw the little girl crying alone in the hospital corridor, she almost kept walking. She had $1 billion deal waiting on her phone, 3 board members demanding answers, and a reputation that had taken 15 years of relentless sacrifice to build. Nothing in her carefully organized life had room for unexpected emotions. But something about the child's tear-filled eyes stopped her in her tracks. And within the next few months, one conversation, one family, and one impossible choice would completely change the future she had sworn she wanted. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected love, please take a moment to like this video, comment, heart kindness story, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that touch the soul. Aria Whitmore was known as one of the youngest CEOs in the country. At 38, she had transformed a struggling technology company into a global powerhouse. Business magazines featured her on their covers. Universities invited her to speak. Investors trusted her judgment without question. Yet behind the polished image was a woman carrying invisible scars. Years earlier, she had watched her own mother struggle after marrying a man who already had children. Aria remembered the endless arguments, the divided loyalties, the feeling of always coming second. She remembered seeing her mother cry alone at night while trying desperately to hold a fractured family together. Those memories hardened into a belief she never challenged. She would never marry a single father. Not ever. Whenever friends suggested introductions or dates, she immediately rejected any man who had children. It was a rule as firm as stone. Her life was simpler that way. Predictable. Safe. Or so she believed. One bright spring morning, Aria visited St. Catherine's Medical Center to announce a major donation from her company. The hospital planned to expand its pediatric care wing, and cameras filled the lobby. Everything went according to schedule until she stepped away from the crowd. That was when she noticed the little girl sitting alone. She looked about 7 years old. Her dark curls were messy, and she held a worn stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Something tugged at Aria's heart. Without thinking, she sat beside her. The girl explained that her mother had died 6 months earlier. Her father was upstairs receiving treatment after collapsing from exhaustion. He had been working 2 jobs while caring for her alone. The child's name was Willow. And her father's name was Elias Hart. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet somehow it stayed with Aria long after she left. That night, while reviewing reports in her penthouse office overlooking the city lights, she found herself thinking about Willow's trembling voice and frightened eyes. For the first time in years, business wasn't the only thing occupying her thoughts. A week later, Aria returned to the hospital for another meeting. There, she saw Elias. He was sitting beside Willow in the cafeteria. He looked exhausted. Dark circles framed his eyes. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his hands bore signs of hard work. Yet despite his fatigue, he smiled warmly as he helped Willow finish her lunch. The scene surprised her. There was no self-pity. No bitterness. Only patience and quiet devotion. Elias noticed her watching and thanked her for comforting Willow the previous week. Their conversation was brief but genuine. As she walked away, Aria felt something unfamiliar. Curiosity. Over the following months, their paths crossed repeatedly. The hospital partnership brought Aria into regular contact with community projects where Elias volunteered. She learned pieces of his story. After losing his wife to an aggressive illness, he had nearly fallen apart. Grief consumed him. There were days he barely managed to get out of bed. But Willow needed him. So every morning he chose to keep going. Not because he was strong. Because he loved his daughter. That simple truth affected Aria more than she expected. She had spent years admiring ambition, intelligence, and success. But there was something profoundly moving about a man who measured achievement by whether his child felt safe and loved. Still, she fought against those feelings. Whenever she sensed herself growing closer to Elias, she reminded herself of her rule. Single fathers brought complications. Heartbreak. Pain. She had seen it before. She refused to repeat history. Then came the evening that changed everything. A severe storm swept through the city. Roads flooded. Power outages spread across entire neighborhoods. Aria became stranded after a charity event. The nearest safe place was a community center where families gathered while waiting for emergency services. Inside, she unexpectedly found Elias and Willow. The building buzzed with worried conversations and flickering emergency lights. Hours passed as rain battered the windows. People shared food, blankets, and stories. For once, there were no executives, no titles, and no social status. Just human beings helping one another. At some point, Willow fell asleep against her father's shoulder. The little girl looked peaceful despite the chaos outside. Aria watched silently. Then she asked Elias the question she had never intended to ask. How had he survived losing the love of his life? The answer came after a long pause. He admitted he never truly recovered. Part of him would always carry that grief. But love, he explained, wasn't something that disappeared when a person died. It transformed. It became gratitude for the memories, strength for the future, and responsibility toward those still living. Most importantly, he said Willow deserved a father who kept believing in happiness. Even after tragedy. Especially after tragedy. His words settled deep inside Aria. For years she had built walls around her heart. She called it independence. Success. Control. But sitting there in the storm, she suddenly wondered whether fear had been making her decisions all along. Not wisdom. Fear. Fear of being hurt. Fear of disappointment. Fear of loving people she could lose. The realization shook her. Over the next several months, their friendship deepened. Aria spent time with Willow. She attended school events. She joined charity projects. Slowly, she became part of moments she never knew she had been missing. Simple moments. Baking cookies. Walking through parks. Listening to a child describe her dreams. The experiences felt strangely precious. For the first time, Aria's enormous penthouse no longer felt impressive. It felt empty. Meanwhile, Willow grew attached to her. The little girl trusted her completely. That trust terrified Aria. Because she knew what was happening. She wasn't merely growing fond of them. She was falling in love. And that meant confronting the promise she had made to herself years ago. One autumn afternoon, she visited her mother's grave. Golden leaves drifted through the quiet cemetery. Aria sat alone for hours. She remembered all the pain her mother endured. But she also remembered something she had ignored. Despite every hardship, her mother had never regretted loving deeply. The wounds came from difficult circumstances. Not from love itself. Suddenly, Aria understood. She had spent years avoiding a future that resembled her mother's. Yet in doing so, she had also avoided the possibility of joy. The possibility of family. The possibility of belonging. Weeks later, a crisis struck Elias's life. The company where he worked announced mass layoffs. He lost his job. Financial pressure returned immediately. Medical bills remained. Mortgage payments loomed. Fear shadowed his face for the first time since Aria had known him. She offered assistance. He politely declined. His pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he began searching desperately for new work. Watching him struggle broke her heart. Not because he lacked strength. Because he carried every burden alone. One evening she found him sitting outside his home after Willow had gone to sleep. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he confessed something. The hardest part wasn't losing his job. It was worrying that he might fail his daughter. That fear haunted him every day. Aria felt tears fill her eyes. In that moment, she finally understood what made Elias extraordinary. Not perfection. Not wealth. Not status. Love. Pure, unwavering love. The kind that continued even when life became unbearable. The kind that stayed. The next morning she made a decision. Not as a CEO. Not as a business leader. As a woman willing to trust her heart. Months later, under a sky painted with warm daylight and soft spring clouds, friends and family gathered in a botanical garden blooming with color. There were no grand celebrity guests. No media attention. No corporate spectacle. Only people who genuinely cared. As Aria walked toward Elias, she felt lighter than she ever had, closing the biggest business deal of her career. Because this time, she wasn't gaining a company. She was gaining a family. Willow stood beside her father wearing a flower crown. The little girl looked happier than Aria had ever seen her. At one point during the ceremony, Willow slipped her small hand into Aria's. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet it carried more meaning than any speech. It felt like acceptance. Like trust. Like home. Years later, journalists would continue asking Aria about the secret behind her success. They expected discussions about leadership, strategy, and innovation. Instead, her answer often surprised them. She spoke about courage. Not the courage to build a business. The courage to let go of fear. The courage to love people despite uncertainty. The courage to embrace a future different from the one she had planned. Because the greatest decision of her life wasn't becoming a CEO. It was choosing not to let old wounds dictate her future. It was choosing Elias. It was choosing Willow. It was choosing love. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Special request: comment below with the words, "Love changes everything," if you believe one meaningful conversation can transform a life forever. As the sun set beyond the garden that evening, Aria watched Willow chase butterflies across the grass while Elias stood beside her. The golden light wrapped around them like a blessing. For years she had believed happiness came from control, careful planning, and never taking emotional risks. Yet the life she treasured most arrived through an unexpected conversation with a frightened little girl in a hospital hallway. The rule she once swore would never be broken had quietly disappeared, replaced by something stronger. And in the end, she discovered that sometimes the heart knows what the mind refuses to accept. Sometimes love arrives disguised as the very thing we promised ourselves we would never choose. And sometimes, when we find the courage to say yes, it gives us everything we never knew we needed.